Hey, welcome to Learn DGlux5 channel. I'm Paul Sinenko, and today we're discussing grids. We're going to cover basic data grid, how to style it, how to create your own cell symbols, how to make your rows shift up and down, and even how to drag and drop rows to change their order. This is going to be interesting. Below you'll find timestamps to allow you to jump directly to portions of this video that you need the most. Other than that, sit back, enjoy, and we're going to the controls to see how it's done. We're going to start with basically going through a basic grid setup, styling it, and on and on. So let's go ahead and get started. So our first element we're going to be looking at has to do with styling the default cell renders. So to prepare, here I have a blank grid as it looks when you just add it to the screen. You can of course find it under right click, insert components, and data grid. And I've dropped a table on here. I actually used list node block, reading some nodes from my data tree. So we have initial data to work with. It looks like this. And we're going to be building a grid displaying this data. So like I mentioned, initially we're going to be looking at styling the default cell renders. So let's go ahead and link children to the grid. Right. Notice that automatically it renders all the columns for you. And let's explore what we've got. So down here, we have only a single column that was added. However, the type is all. That's set by default, which basically means render all the columns that is in your source table. So that's exactly what it's doing. Alternatively to the all option, you can also select a name where you can specifically provide a name of the column to be displayed. So if we look at our table, right, name, path, base, profile. So let's start with the name. So we're going to make this column to display the name. So we're just going to type in the column name here. Right now we have a single column that displays one column of our table. And of course, we now have control over width and sizing of that particular column, right, rather than all columns at once. So this is a more common option when you're looking for styling options that are flexible enough to actually address each column differently. Okay, so we're gonna let's set the size to be a fixed size of 200 pixels. That's how. Actually, let's do a little bit less, 150. And so let's move on to rows. So rows section of the grid allows you to edit row sizing and row fill, unless you're using a custom cell, which we'll get to in a second. So row sizing can be found here, and it's basically a number. So providing a pixel row height will affect all rows for all columns. You cannot have different rows of different height for different columns. So one setting for everything, which is why it's located here, basically a level above individual columns. In addition, you can specify, of course, any spacing that may be required, and other visual options. So here we can also add separating lines, so we can clearly see cell separation. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add a line. Sorry, this is a text color. So we're going to go to fill and stroke, right? And you can pick fill and outline as well as text color for various states of rows, right? So main is the default basically color options for all rows. So let's say we can do, let's do white fill with light gray lines. Oops. All right, collapsed it. There you go. and the line will be solid, 1 pixel wide, right? So that you see that immediately gave us the vertical lines there, I mean horizontal lines, and of course the text. Let's make it dark gray. Right, so all these parameters affect default cell renders. By default, I mean when you're not using your custom symbol to render a cell, right? So, and obviously we're not. Right? So in the similar fashion, using the header option gives you control over the header, right? So we can see right now header is basically has no styling other than white text. So same thing here. We can give it a height. We can give it a fill. So something like this. We can also add various separating lines. Right, that will outline the column separation. And again, spacing, text spacing, text alignment, justification, and all the good stuff. So this will give you basic options to style the grid using the default renders. So now if you want to add columns, there are two ways you can do this. You can go to data grid and just click add column button, right? And by default, it adds a column with all as an option here. Therefore, you can again change it to the name and type in the name of a specific column that you're trying to display, in this case path, right? And then set specific size. You can make the column flex size, flex shrink, or flex grow, meaning allow it to expand to take up whatever space is available to it, right? So when there are zeros, then your width remains your width. If you allow it to grow or shrink, right, it will of course grow or shrink as space becomes available when your grid size changes overall. Very similar to your typical page sizing options. The alternative way to add a column is to simply select one of the existing columns and duplicate it by pressing Ctrl D. Control D, or well, will be obviously Option D on Mac, and then proceeding with just like we had before. Okay, so this way you can add columns to your table. There's one more option we have not looked at, and which is repeater. So repeater gives you an option to dynamically create columns based on configuration table. So basically, you can create a table of columns, and let's actually experiment with that. So I'm going to create a new table. And we'll call it columns. And let's say I want to display row, profile, and what else do we have here? Let's do type. And type. Right, so I'm going to use this as my configuration table for the repeater type column. Okay, so to basically now tell which column needs to be displayed, if I recall correctly. So where it says selector, where you used to type things in manually, you can now drag the column of your configuration table that contains your column names and drop it, right? So as you can see, dynamically generated the columns that are in this table, right? Now the very useful part of this is that this table can contain other parameters that could be bound in the same fashion to the rest of the properties of this column configuration. For example, sortable. Let's say I want some of these columns to be sortable and some not. So let me go ahead and add a column. Sortable. Right, let's say this is true, false, true. Okay, so I'm going to open this and bind the sortable column to the sortable property, right? And that, of course, makes some of these sortable, right? Like row and type, and profile is not, right? So this table can contain basically a set of properties for every column. Oh, by the way, size is a good way to demonstrate. So let me remove flex grow so they remain constant size. And by the way, I'm only naming them for aesthetics. You know, they don't have to be named as something that you're affecting, right? This is purely for as a good practice. So size, let's say, is do 40, 100, 100, right? And bring up the table again, and we're going to bind the size to the size, right? Notice that it affected the size of those columns that were added here by the repeater. Again, take a notice that I'm dragging the whole column, not a single cell, right? So it respectively will apply each of the rows values to each of the columns that's being generated. So if you're looking to dynamically generate columns, but still retain individual control of every column, unlike using the all option where you can only apply settings to all columns at once, repeater is a way to go. Right, so the configuration table, in this case, I'm obviously typing things in manually, but you know, you can generate this dynamically with various logic and have this happen automatically. If you're wondering about the sort block that somehow got added here, this happens when we enable sort on any of the columns. The sort block gets automatically inserted between the source and the data grid with your sort configuration. Right, so if you notice as you resort, right, you see that it actually writes to this block, changing your sort. Okay, cool. So this, so far, this will allow you to set up a basic grid with normal text cells with nothing fancy. So just plain text. You control the background, the various colors, so text color, outline color, fonts, justification, and of course the column sizing and control. So now we're ready to go a step further and actually take a look at selection. So first we're going to look at the very basic mode of selecting a row. So we're not going to use any custom cells at this point. We'll use this standard cells and standard selection method. So when we go to the grid component itself, the top level component, there is a section called selection. Underneath, we have some options here. So by default, selection is off, right? So we can switch it on. So we can do basically single select. Right, we can do toggle select, meaning you can select or unselect with a click, and then multi-select, of course. So first, let's look at single select. So for this to work, we need to have alternate fill so we can see what's selected. So if you go to rows and look at your fill and stroke, there's your cell selected fill. So let's give it some obvious fill here. So let's use this bluish fill with maybe a lighter blue outline. And we're going to use white text. Right, so now let's go ahead and try to select. Right, so what you can see here is that as I select a row, its fill, of course, changing according to these settings. And if you look at selection right here, right, you can see that I'm getting an index, a selected index of whatever row is currently selected. Okay, so this is useful, but it'd be nice to get actual row rather than an index. So that can easily turn into a row if you simply use select rows block, drop it. It comes pre-bound, but if you drop it onto the grid's data flow, however, you can always manually bind it, right? So for the source, you use the same table as what's driving the grid. And then, of course, for the indices, you bind from the selected index, right? So this. Right? So this gives you a row that corresponds to your selection. So now if I want to toggle select, of course, it's going to work the same way, right? And multi-select will also work the same way. Okay, well, this is great. What are the limitations? Well, limitation is that selection here happens by index. What does that mean? Well, that means that as long as the indices of your rows don't change, the selection will remain what it is. However, what if your table is updating periodically and things can get inserted or dropped from it on the update? Well, that's going to cause all the indices to shift, and your item index 2, for example, which is this, right? So we have 0, 1, 2. Well, your items index 2 all of a sudden will be item that's different from the one you selected initially. Let's say on the update, this VAV1-1 goes away, right? So that means everything will shift up, and all of a sudden, the item 2 is not 1-10, but instead 1-11, right? So it'll shift your selections, and that's it, right? You can no longer tell what's been originally selected. So there's a way to deal with that. So this method that we're just looking at is great for static data sets where you're not expecting your data to change, and all you care about is the basic selection that remains there. What is it not good for? Like I said, it's not good for tables that get updated and could potentially change. Also, this is not good for potentially tables where you need to add something from one table to another table, grid, of course, one grid to another grid, and then have it go away from the original one, right? Because again, as your selection goes away, all your indices shift. So if you somehow need to still maintain what's been selected, well, you can't because the indices all shifted. So what do you do in that case? So in that case, you have to use a different method of selecting something. And let's dive into that next. All right, so let's take a look at a different method of handling your row selection that's going to be independent of any indexing that may happen. So first, let's turn off the original selection method. So we don't need anything selected, and we're going to turn off selection altogether. Okay, so in this case, indices are not good enough for us, and we need to maintain selection based on something unique, a unique ID of a row. So obviously, for this method to work, your table has to have something unique, right? Each row has to have something unique, either UUID or some column that's unique for every row. Otherwise, this whole thing doesn't make any sense. If it does not, you may consider creating a new column that's a combination of several other columns that will be unique, again, for every row. Now, in my case, path would be unique, right, for every single row. There'll be no case where the same path will occur twice. Right? So for me, this is good enough to use as the ID. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a table. Just call it selection. And it's going to contain two columns, UUID and select. As a matter of fact, I don't even need selected because the mere presence of UUID in this table will indicate that the item is selected. So we'll go even more basic route. So just this, just UUID. Right. Yeah, actually, I'll take it back. I will add a column called selected. And the only reason I'm going to do that is so that when I join it with our original data set, I'm not going to have to create a new column, right, to display that selected is true. It's just going to already exist and come from this table. So you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. So here I have this table. Next, the standard symbol will not, the standard cell will no longer do because it can't really do anything. And we need to somehow deal with this table. We need to add stuff or remove stuff from there so we can no longer use the original, basically the standard cell renderer for this particular functionality. So I'm going to need to create a custom symbol to use as a cell, which will allow me to select, deselect stuff, like a checkbox. So let's quickly do that. This really is not going to take very long. All right, so we're doing a simple box with another box inside. All right, like this, maybe a little bit smaller. So 25 by 25. All right, give it an outline so we can actually see it. And a bit of rounded corners. Partial to rounded corners, as you can see. So here you go. It starts looking like a checkbox, except there's no check inside. Again, for this particular experiment, we're going to go the simplest possible route. We're not going to have any fancy checkboxes. I'm just going to insert a font there with an X letter in there. And that's going to be my checkbox, like this, right? I know, very crude, but bear with me. And of course, I'm going to make this hand cursor. Now, I'm actually going to physically give it a dark gray background because if it's going to appear over my white row fill, you're not going to see much of this. So let's give it a kind of darker gray background. And I'm ready to make this a symbol. Convert to a symbol. Let's call it cell checkbox. There we go. And no, you didn't miss anything. There is no functionality in this symbol yet. So we're about to do this. So I'm going to copy this name of this symbol that I just created. It's also right here, my symbols, if you care. Go to the column where I want to use it. And this is going to be the first column here. So I'm going to change this to use row. All right. Just so that, because again, grid cannot display the same column twice. Notice that as soon as I added row here, it disappeared from this repeater column set. It cannot display same column twice. So I want to use the most useless column to hold my checkbox, right? So that every other column that actually has potentially useful value will be saved for actually displaying it. Get 35 pixels wide because it's my symbol size as well, so it'll match nicely. I'm going to paste my symbol name in here, right? I can also drag, if you recall, from here. So either way is fine. There you go. I know it doesn't look very kosher. Again, we're not trying to spend too much on styling here to illustrate the main point here. Okay, so now let's go and edit one of the instances. Double click. And first thing we need to do is pass in our selection table. So I'll just call it selection. Save the symbol. Go to my column, which now has a renderer, right? Because I'm using a symbol now to render the cell right here. So I got a renderer. It shows me my symbol properties. So I'm going to take my selection table and drop it right there. right? I'm going to go back into my selection. And next, I'm going to add a property for UUID. That's going to be my unique value. And I'm going to do basically, I'm going to open the table that drives the grid. I'm going to go to my render and take my unique field, which is path, and bind the whole column to the UUID, which means each element here will get its own UUID. So if I, let's say, go to number 2 here and edit and look at its properties, right? You see that it has that path in here. So now I can do my logic. So here's what I can say. So I have my selection, and my logic is that if this ID is found in this selection table, then item is selected. Otherwise, it's not. So let's go ahead and filter it. So it's going to be a filter block. We're filtering the selection table. We need to construct the expression. All right, so expression will be path equals, and then UUID. All right, and we're going to replace the UUID with UUID that we passed in. Right, so this results in very basic expression, path equals to UUID. So I'm going to round this into the filter and then measure the length of the results. And we're going to get 0 because we have nothing selected. And we're going to check for this 0. So we're going to say if it's more than 0, then selection is true, otherwise false. All right, and that, of course, will control our text blocks. Okay, so that's cool. Next thing is, well, now we need to give it ability to select. So this expression here, that's going to come in handy. So I'm going to bring this up. And let's go to, oh yeah, and this will also come in handy. So let's go to the actual checkbox. And here we need to set up a logic as follows. If this is false, so if currently selected is false, then we need to add a row to the selection table whose UUID is this, right? Simple enough. So add row. All right, this is our target. Column UUID. Value this. Happens when? Happens when not selected. And one more time. Enabled. And the event, of course, is click, right? Well, when we click on it, we want this to fire. Okay, so that will allow us to select it. Next, we need deselect. So if I click again, I want to deselect. Now, what happens if you want, so this, of course, will give us a toggle selection. So after this is done, we'll take a look at what do we need to do if we don't want toggle selection, if we just want single select. Okay, so this will add the row. Now we need logic to remove it, which of course will be remove rows. This, oh yeah, and target, of course, is the selection. And our condition is going to be the same as we used to check if we're selected or not. That's why I brought it up, so we don't have to redo this, reconstruct it, because that's the row we would need to remove if we want to deselect. In this case, it's going to be enabled when it's currently selected. So when this is true, it's going to be enabled. So we're going to just directly bind this, and it still happens on click, like this. All right, so this, if done correctly, should allow us to now select and deselect items as pleased. And it doesn't quite do that yet. So let's take a look at what happens to our selection table. Yes, it works fine. Oh yeah, we also need to add selected equals to true, since we've agreed that we're going to keep it there. So let me go back in there. And so when we're adding a row, selected equals to true. So this is just so we're consistent. And we need to understand why our X is not showing up. So path equals to, well, okay, let's do this. Let's select the first item like so. Let's take a look at our selection table. All right, there you go. So we have first item is selected, or at least supposed to be selected now. So let's go in here. Oh yeah, I know what the problem is. The problem is, of course, that it's not path. The column name in our selection table is UUID. There. That's going to be a little better. So, and there we go. So as you can see, as I select, right, items are added to my selection table, and based on them being added here, you know, X is being displayed. So I can, of course, uncheck them just the same, right? Sorry, too many things open. There. Now, what I'm going to do is, because I probably want this selected property in my main table, driving the whole grid, so that I can later make symbols for the rest of the columns and have the selected property available to me to maybe fill them differently. Because remember, I'm no longer using the selection functionality of the grid itself. That means that these settings no longer have any effect. Right? I no longer have selected rows as far as grid is concerned. I'm doing my own selection, so I have to take care of my own fill. The only way I can do this is by creating my own symbols to use for the cells, and basically having the select property available to me so I can color them differently based on it being true. So I'm going to join. All right, so I'm going to join this and this, path being equal to UUID, right? Netting us this table, which has the selected item true, which gives us a nice property to drive styling in other symbols that I would have normally built, but haven't yet in this case. Okay, so now we wanted to also look at how to make this a single select without toggle. Well, this would simply mean that prior to new selection, I would need to clear out the previous, any content of the table that was previously there. So I'm going to go ahead, go in there. All right, so here where I'm adding the row, I would need to first run remove rows, right? The condition will be row more equals than 0, so basically all rows. Target would be the selection. Then, of course, our click would be invoking this. The condition for enabled will be the same. And then on complete of this deletion, so let me just pin that property. So on complete, then I can trigger the add. So this will ensure, right? Well, next time I click, see, this will ensure that every time I click, all the other selections are deleted. Right? Of course, I still have the toggle deselect logic there. So this makes it a single select toggle, right? So if I remove the logic to remove rows, then I won't be able to toggle this. Then it'll just be single select, just like the single select option here, right? And that's how that will be achieved. In real life, what I actually would do is I would typically make it a property on the symbol that would allow it to run in all these modes based on selection. So you can select it to be single select, single toggle, or multiple toggle, right? And reuse the same cell symbol, the selection cell symbol, in various grids as needed, of course. Okay, so let's bring this back to the selection mode that we had before. And like so. Just confirm that that still works. It does. Okay, that's the selection table. Okay, and well, we're ready to move on to the next element, which is basically creating creating custom symbols to run your cells. Okay, so we're ready to create custom cells. So let me re-add the name column back in there since we took it out. We're kind of missing the name from here, and I don't want it to flex grow. I'm quite happy with it just being 150, and kind of like everything aligned to the left with a bit of a gap, but that doesn't matter because we're about to completely remove all the standard cells and use our own custom ones. So let me go ahead and adjust the selection cell so it fits better. So rather than using a dark background, we're going to keep it light background. We'll add the selection coloring later once we're ready to distribute it to all the symbols. Right, and of course, this will make it darker. Right, and the X itself. Use slightly darker font. And there we go. This seems to fit a little bit better. Okay, and the first thing that we want to build is basic string cell, a cell that's designed to display a text value in the similar fashion that the standard renderer works, but with options that we would need to work with our logic. Okay, so let me move the grid down a bit so we have some space to work with. And I'm going to start with a group. I'm going to make it match our row size, so it's easier to work with initially. Give it a background. Notice I built some of the items before making it a symbol, and then convert it to symbol and go in there and build the rest. This is just a habit. You're free to do it whichever way you want. You can fully build it out and then make it a symbol, or you can make the group symbol right away and just go in there and build the rest. It's completely up to you. So I'm gonna use 10 pixel spacing. Drop a text in there. All right, maximize the text, left justified. And this is going to be standard single line text display, so very vanilla. So I'm going to go ahead and convert this, call it cell string. Okay, so I'm going to go and use it in my grid right away. So go into the name column, which is my second column. Go to symbol. So use this symbol. All right, there it just appeared for me right away. So I can delete it from here and continue editing in the grid. I always prefer to edit in context whenever possible. So double click. And first thing we need to do is that we need to be able to pass the value into it. So string value. All right, so we can now grab the table, go to the column, take the column that we're trying to display. I'm sorry, we need to first expose the render, take the column we're trying to display, and drop it. The nice part is you can display any column, right? Even though it's driven by the name column, right? I can really bind any column here. And then let's get back in here, right? And in the properties where we have value now, we just need to bind it to the text, like so. And I'm going to be aesthetically correct here and enable ellipses so that if item is too long, it's going to add a nice ... before it cuts it off. That, of course, unfortunately cannot maintain center alignment on the text. So the cure for that is to make the text itself, rather than being 100%, make it auto. So it's only as wide as it needs to be. And of course, your vertical alignment can be stretched. Otherwise, auto will still stretch it all the way. So it's going to be center. So we're going to use a group to center the text. That's only as high as it needs to be, rather than text centering its own text. Because when you use ellipses, text cannot center itself vertically. That's just a limitation, but that's how you go around this. All right, so there we go. So we have a cell that's displaying our value. This time it's our own symbol. It's not, it's not relying on the standard cell render. And the cool part is now I can use the selected property to, to fill it differently. So jump right back in there. And how do I get to select the property? I could, of course, add it here and then bind it from a table. Or I can just go to my symbol and drop map to table in my symbol root right here, which will give me a whole row, right? Every property in the row that's driving the grid. Now it's missing the selected because I didn't bind the result of my join to my grid there. Now my map to table gives me selected property. So I can now bind it to my fill. I'm going to bind it using a control. So here's the fill. So I'm going to hold control. Right. I'm going to do boolean. It's going to be when true. I want it to be blue. Otherwise, white. Right. I'm going to do the same for text itself. Hold control. Boolean. When true, text is white. Otherwise, dark gray. Done. Okay, so let's close this. Look, it's already working. Right now, of course, I would need to do this for all of them or use this symbol everywhere. So for example, I can just copy this symbol, cell string, and use it in my next column, like so. And of course, I need to go in, bring my table back up, and I need not to forget to bind my value, which in this case is path. There. See? Now, of course, since I'm using the cell fill to show selection, I need to make sure I don't have any gaps introduced by the grid itself. This is basically, since now I've specified gaps inside my symbol, I no longer need grid to control gaps. So I'm going to set gaps to 0, which will basically lock cells together. And this gives me a continuous kind of fill line. And I can, of course, do the same logic on the checkbox cell and going forward. However, this path is rather lengthy, or it could be. And let's say I want a cell that actually does a multi-line text. So I can fit much longer items in the same space. So I don't want to start from scratch. So what I'll do is I'll just copy the cell string, duplicate it, rename it. Let's do cell text area. Right. I'm going to use it right away. So I'll make sure I have my column 2 selected. Right. So I'm going to use this. Right. And now I can go edit. Right now it's a copy, of course, of the cell string, so it does everything exactly the same way. But here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable multi-line text, word wrap, and maybe make text a little bit smaller so that 2 lines fit nicely side by side. Oh yeah, and cannot have ellipses when you have multi-line. Otherwise, it's not going to move to another line. It'll just show ellipses. Okay, so now when I resize my column, oh yeah, I didn't make them easily resizable like so, right? You notice now I have 2 lines. And because this is a duplication of the previous one, all the selection fill logic is still there. So, very little modifications I had to do. Of course, so this can be expanded to all kinds of various cells to handle things. For example, for type, rather than displaying a word, I can create a symbol that just displays an icon, right? Easier to deal with. I can also have a cell that just gives me a config menu, which has a call out. So it allows me to maybe jump into some submenu or some form or other page based on the row that I'm doing it on. The options are not really limited here. You can do what you want. So, cool. Next challenge. Well, in the next part, we're going to use it reordering rows. So, ability to change order of things using various methods. So, bear with me. We're diving right in. Okay, so it's time to take a look at rearranging rows. So basically changing row order based on, well, in the first case, based on button click. So imagine each row having a button that allows you to move it up or down the hierarchy. So that's the first case we're going to explore. And before we do anything else, since this is going to involve rearranging the table, right? The table has to be writable. Right? We cannot operate on a non-writable table. And also sort, right? We'll have to can no longer be in the picture here, right? Because of course sorting will immediately remove any rearrangement that we've done. So I mean we can keep it, right, in this case, but you just have to keep in mind that resorting will of course get rid of any rearrangement. So first we need to make a writable table out of this join block. And actually not the join block, out of this coming out of the sort block, right? So the join can remain as is because the selection is joined later to it, so that's fine. So we're gonna take a table and we'll very creatively call data. Actually, no, we can't. That's a reserved word because there's already data property on the data grid. So we'll call it data table. Right? And we need to dynamically set it to this table here. So that, of course, is going to be the state block. All right, so we're affecting, so we're writing to this table. We're We're using this table as a value. And this is one of those cases where you cannot disable serialization, or you should not, right? So if you disable serialization, the final table will not be writable. So if you want it to remain writable, you cannot switch this on. So you cannot disable serialization. So this is one of those rare cases where you should not touch this. So that's done. That's our state block. Now we need to decide when we want to run it. If you simply want to pass any change in the table right on, then you can use the table itself as the trigger, like this, which will immediately pass on any changes to this table here. So see, now it's a copy, and any change in here will immediately translate to a table in here. This is fine for more or less static data sets. However, this is probably not a good idea if, for example, your table contains values that are changing, because of course, any change in value will immediately cause this to trigger, and it'll keep rewriting your writable table. So any rearrangements you make will get immediately overridden by basically by a change. So instead, let's take another approach. We're only going to take unique IDs, UUIDs, and operate with those, right? And then later join the rest of the data to them. This way, any changes in cells, right, like for example, values, which we don't have here, but we could, will no longer mess with our writable table. So rather than literally making a copy of the whole table, at first I'm going to only grab one column. So I'm going to use select columns block. Right, and I'm only going to grab path column, which is my UUID. Right, and that's going to be what I'm writing. So there, this results in a table like this. Next, if there's a change in the table, I don't want, so if there are no changes in paths, right, I don't want to write anything. However, if original table contains values that are changing, that means the whole table is changing, which would mean even this table, which only contains path column, is still changing because it keeps getting derived from a table that's changing, so that's a change in itself. Unfortunately, this will also cause this to, again, re-trigger. So here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to probably sort it so that even if there is no change in paths, but there's a change in order the paths come in, even that will not trigger it. So I'm going to sort this just using a regular string sort. Column is path, like this. Then I'm going to create a CSV out of this, right? So it's going to be CSV writer is what I need. Like this, with the header, of course. And then I'm going to use CSV parser to parse it back. Okay, with the header. So what we get is still the same table. However, now it's isolated from the original. So now this final table will only register a change if there's a physical change in one of those paths, or maybe a new path is added. That's when there'll be actually a change. Otherwise, if just because the original table is refreshing, right, but there are no changes to paths in it, there'll be no change registered here. At this stage, the object is still changing. The table object is changing. Even though the paths are identical and there are no visible changes in paths, it's still a new object every time because the original object keeps changing. But once it goes through, basically becomes a string, which is what this here, it's no longer an object, it's a string now. So now if there's no change in the string, there's no change, right? String cannot have a change, but not be changed in any way. And then we're, of course, parsing it back into the table. And that creates a table that's completely isolated from the original in terms of object changes. So again, it will register a change if there's actual physical change in characters, right, in values of those paths. But if there are no changes in values of those paths, just because the original table is renewed all the time on every update, it will not trigger change in this kind of instance of it. And that's what we're going to use to get our writable list of paths here. And then so that what we see conforms to what's in here, right? I'm going to do another join, right? This way, right? And this table is going to lead the way as input 1. Of course, path is the column. This guy, our original table that drove the grid, is going to be input 2. Sorry, what am I doing here? Input 2. And it's also path is the column. So basically, the output will always inherit the order of this list of paths, right? However, any columns that have had values update will still have those values updating, right? So finally, this can now go and drive our grid. Okay, so now we're prepared. Now we're prepared to start working on order change, right? So now we have a writable table whose order we can change now, right? To have it physically changed in the field. So let's get started. So this will of course require a special type of cell. So let's build it. So group as all the other cells, it's 45 pixels high. And okay, so 45 pixels high. This doesn't need to be very wide, probably maybe 45 wide. So a box again. It's going to be vertical. It's going to have 2 nested items in there. I'm going to use a text, one pointing up and one pointing down. So let me copy a character real quick to actually use up and down arrows. Now I'm going to use Windows font character map here. I do recall downloading a better font exploration app. I can't find it now, so I'm just use the Windows one, and I'm looking for the up pointing arrow and down pointing arrow. Here they are. So this will be the up arrow, and down arrow, by the way. So center, center, and finally the down arrow. Okay, well, crude and took way too much time, but nevertheless, it's here. So let's call them up and down. And of course, you need to have a hand cursor. Okay, so I'm going to make this a symbol right away. So we'll, to keep the convention, we'll call cell reorder. And we're going to, well, we need a column on which to base this. Right, so this last one is a repeater column. We don't need it for now. Let me delete that. So I'll just add one more column. And I think we have, let me see which columns we still have available. We have, for example, again, remember, you have to have a real column on which to base the column. You don't have to display the value of the original column, but the column has to exist. So I'm just going to use writable. Because why not? So I'm going to say type name and selection will be writable. Right. The width. So no flexing there. Just 45 pixels fixed width. And instead of using this text area cell symbol, right, we don't want that. I'm going to use the one we just created called reorder, like this. And now I just need to get in and do the magic. So, okay, so let's look at down shit first. So what needs to happen when I click down? Well, first of all, before anything can happen, I need to pass in a table on which I'm going to perform this operation. So data table, no caps. We don't like yelling here. So first things first, I need to pass in a writable, remember, table. So I'm going to go back to my data flow. And what I'm passing in is this data table, right? A list of my UUIDs, which I'm going to be operating on. So now going back in here, going back to my down, and now we're ready to start thinking. All right, so this is the table. Next we need to know what? Well, we need to know self. Who am I, right? So that I can do anything with my own order. Well, by I mean this particular row, this cell. So UUID is what we want to pass in. And of course, that will come from our grid table. And path is our UUID. Get right back in and keep thinking. So what will be the logic that needs to happen? So I would need to traverse this table, right, until I encounter my own ID. After which I need to traverse, well, I need to remove it. Sorry, okay, let me start from scratch. I need to remove my, I need to find my index, right? What index is this ID? Then I need to remove it from the table, add one index, and reinsert it back. Or in words of a script, basically take all the rows prior to my index, right? And then add one row from all the indices, all the rows after my index, and add it to array prior to my index, then add my index back in, and then add all the following rows, right? And set the result to my data table. So let's see if we can make this happen. Now, let me try to do it without a script first. We may be forced to switch back to a script, but let's see if we can get away doing it without a script. And let's see where that gets us. So first, we need to filter all the UUIDs for the one that equals to hours. And so we can find out what index that will be. Now, there's a shortcut that you should not take right? Any cell, if you look at under advanced, the kind of the top level of any symbol you use in the cell, right, has index property, right? Index here. And technically, this would have an index that corresponds to the row number. However, because the grid is by definition a lazy load system, as you scroll, especially scroll fast, as rows are unloaded from the top and loaded to the bottom, these indices will get changed and reindexed quickly, right? They'll be flashing, basically. So this may cause a lot of problems for you if you really rely on those to stay consistent. So we're not going to take that shortcut. So we're actually going to properly look, all right? We're going to search path equals UUID. You've seen that before. Our UUID is, of course, self. And that's going to be our filter, which nets us this. However, there's a problem. This is supposed to be ID1, right? So here, if you look at 1-1, 1-1, look, it's supposed to be ID1, but row 0, because the resulting data set after a filter, rows are always reindexed, right? That's a problem. So this doesn't tell us what index it is. So what can we do? What we can do is we can map a column to this original table. So we'll bring in the existing one, but we'll create another one called index, which is going to be equal to row. So basically, we created a duplicate of row called index because this is our column now. It's not going to get reindexed when you filter the table. And we're going to run this through the table filter. Now we have the original index. So we know that the row that we're dealing with is row number 1, right? So index 1, which is really the second row because it starts from 0. So we need to then get all the rows from this table that are less than that and one row that's more than that. So first, let me actually bring out my index as a number so we can see it, so we don't have to keep referring to this table. So let's call it my index. So all right, we know that this row where I'm pressing this button is index 1. So next, we're going to filter our original table. Let me close these things so you don't get confused. Right? Condition. Row less than index. And of course, index here being 1. Okay. Cool. So that gets us one row that comes before our row. Next, we need to grab one more row that comes after my index and add it to this result. So we're going to add. We're going to add 1. We're going to use select rows. From this table, index 2, so gets us this. So one row after the 1-1, right? And we're ready to join it to our rows prior, right? And mode will be union here because we're literally just trying to concat 2 tables. Don't need anything here. Like this, right? Then we need to add self. like I said, without a script, this will be fairly lengthy path. It's not going to be much slower than a script because you're going to be visualizing the same steps you'll be taking in the script anyway. But here, visually, you'll be able to see and trace it easier. Well, for some people anyway. Okay, so we need self now, which means we can use this. Well, we shouldn't use this because this is index column, which we don't want. So let's use the selected rows block again and just use self index for selection. Use another join, where we're going to join what we had so far plus plus our own row. Now we need the rest of the rows that start with a row bigger than one more than this one. So basically, so we have, if you look at the results, by the way, we should do union here. We have 1, 2, 3. We have 2 prior. The index 2 is self, the one we just added. So we need everything more than index 2. So let's create new filter expression. More than index 2. Okay. So table filter. So which would, row more than 2, yes. Oh, so I missed. So this goes in here, and this goes in here. So that gets us basically from here and down. Which is, hold on, give me a second here to get my bearings. So this is VV. Wait a second. Oh, sorry, I opened the wrong table. Okay, this. So we're up to here, right? So we really swapped these two, right? And then from here and down, right, we need to add to the rest of the party here. So another union. So what we got so far plus the rest. And finally, this is the final table. Okay, so what we need to do now is set, state. Use a state block. To set this table to this result, but only if the length is 1 or more, just so that we don't, if something fails here, because remember, we haven't done any checks, like what if the row is already the last row and stuff like that. We'll do that, but as a safety precaution, right, we only want to do this if the table is non-null length or non-zero length. And true, false, right? So that's going to basically enable or disable the state block. And of course, it's going to happen on click. Okay, so we've done a lot here. Now it's really interesting to see if it's just going to work in the first shot. So let's try it. So, no, it did not. I think it did not, but let me check. So we're looking at this table. So 1-1, it's this guy here. Okay, so nothing happened. All right, so let's investigate. So this would be the correct thing. This is the correct target. So what's going on? So that got set correctly. So now we're one row down. But looks like it may not have been reflected in here. Either that or something keeps writing back to this for no reason. Let me turn this off just to make sure. Nope, nothing is writing to it, so that is fine. Well, so the reason this does not work is because even though we're setting the table in properties, this doesn't propagate to the original table. So basically, while you can add remove rows just fine, what you cannot do is set a whole new table, right? It will not propagate out of the repeater. So um, doing it inside the script would have worked because you can actually, you're writing into the table. You're not kind of rewriting the whole table itself. But in this case, so since we already set it up this way, here's what we can do. So we can actually bring up the table itself as a target, go into our stay block, and rather than targeting our table property, we'll target the original table from outside the grid. You'll notice the path looks a little funky, right? At stage, so that means root of the symbol, and then still out, so that gets us to the grid. And then that data table, that data. So this directly targets the table outside of the grid. So let's see if it can work now. There it is. It's working quite well. All right, so now up does not work. We didn't do anything up. So let's set it up, move up now. So we can move them back and forth. And also we need to add protection. Protection being that, what, if this is already last row, then, just disable the button. So we don't even need to bother, adding any extra logic to do this. Just literally disable the button. So what does that mean? So that means we check the length, not even the length, the last index. So let's use aggregation block. And we're going to our data table, column row, method last, right? Last row is 45. So if my index, so if my index more or equals to 45, then false. False true. And that, of course, can go straight up here. To the mouse enabled, right? And as the added bonus, let's link mouse enabled to the opacity. So we can visually dim the icon 50% when it's not supposed to be active. Okay, so that should give us enough to prevent unexpected movement. So we're, oh yeah, I moved my grid. So let me delete this guy and push the grid back up. This is the last row. Notice that the down button is disabled here, and it doesn't do anything. Right? While everything else is quite happy. There. So here I can actually select so we can see it moving up. Okay, so let's set up the up movement, and then we'll move on to the next functionality. So to move these bindings out of the way. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy most of it, except for the binding, and just move it, copy it into the up, because my up functionality will be based on the down functionality. It's similar, so we just need to do different things. So first of all, to check validity, I no longer need to check with a length of the table. What I do need to check is that my row that I'm trying to affect is more or equals to 1, then I'm okay. So true, else false. So if I'm looking at the row number 1, index 0, then no button for me, right? Yeah, this is already bound. No, it's not bound. So opacity here. Okay, so now it's protected. Now the logic for the move up would be slightly different. So first I need to get everything up to my index -1. So subtract my index -1. And that's going to be my first data set. Right. Next, I need self. So by the way, this is what I'm dealing with here. So this, this is what I'm dealing with here. So this is first data set, then self, which is my own index. Right. So let me move it up here in my arrangement so we can tell what goes what. Okay. Then what? Then the index that was that used to be basic practice. So 41, yes. So now this. And so just to check. So here, the properties. I'm 314. This is there. This is the original order. There it is. So this is the original order. Number 40, 314. I'm number 40 here, right? I'm between -4 and -5. This is a new order, 314, right? So I moved up 1. So I took index. So I took everything up to. Oops, hold on. Okay, that's why. Okay, so this is already less than. So I don't need another subtraction. So it just needs to be less than 40. So everything prior to myself, which is up to 3-4. Okay, second. So here, we'll look at this result here. All right, so up to this. No, sorry, I was wrong. I do need to subtract here. You see, it's quite easy to confuse oneself. Yes. Then myself, and then what used to be before myself. Okay, so, and now we need index 39. So this should also be subtract. There. So now 314. So 333. Yeah. So I switched these two. Right. And now the rest, which is, I think, above 40. Yes. So if everything is correct, we now have this. So number 40 used to be number 40. This is okay. So let's compare it to the original table. So let me close these numerous tables here so we don't get confused and just look at the original. Okay, number 40, right? So it used to be number 40. Now we're number 39. So we used to be between 34, 35. Now we're above 34, and there's 35, and below 33, right? So we moved up, shifted up one row. So that's basically exactly what we were trying to do. And again, I'm checking the length, make sure we're not setting zero length table, and we're not. So let's go ahead and accept. And now we should be able to move things up. Maybe not. So first of all, our first row has it disabled, which is correct, but it works, which is not correct. So let's see. I think we somewhere in there we mixed something up. So no. Oh, am I using? Let me make sure I use the on-click event from the button itself, not from the whole thing. Yeah, I used the wrong. Okay, I used the click event of the whole cell rather than just the down button. So that's intercepting the click and not letting the up button work. So the up button then is this. Okay, so let's try it. So down, down, up, up, up. Okay. All right. So we're good. This works. So next chapter, we're looking into a way to do this, but this time using drag and drop, which is, of course, will make it much more flexible, but also might be a little tricky to set up. So let's dive right in. You know what? Before we dive into drag and drop, let's quickly look at what would a script look like. So if we were to do this same thing with a script rather than a data flow, what would that look like? So I'm going to duplicate this reorder cell. And by the way, this page will be available for download. So you'll be able to dissect it yourself. That's why I'm trying to not modify existing cells, but rather create new cell symbols. So you have examples of various kinds. So script. And we're going to use that for our reorder column. Okay. As a matter of fact, why don't we do this? Why don't I create another column? I do need to give it another column to be based on. I think invocable was available. Yes. Okay, so this, the original one, we'll keep it as this non-script version, and this one will be the script version. Okay, so I just want both to exist at the same time. So let me go ahead and get into one. Okay, so the only thing I want to keep here is the safety check that disables the button, because that's not going to change. Right, everything else I'm deleting. Right. Maybe keep my index, because that's going to be useful in the script. Okay, I'm going to use a script. All right, and the first thing I'm going to do is pass in the table. All right. Okay. Next, my index. The reason I'm passing it in is just so I don't have to iterate through in the script and figure it out. I already have it. You know, if I didn't have it, then I would do it inside the script, but I have it, so we'll keep it at that. Yeah, so no auto run. It's going to run on invoke because it's going to write straight back. And let's start writing the script. So first thing we want to do is read in the table, make an object out of it. So table get rows, that's our table. So I'm referencing this property here. Data table. Right? And I want to read it in as an object. All right, next, just going to turn that into a variable so I don't have to keep referencing the property. Now I'm ready to iterate. So, all right, this will iterate through my data set. And I want to well, I only want to iterate actually up to, I don't want to iterate through the whole data set. So let's do this. I'm going to iterate from I equals 0. Then I is less than my index. Remember, so this is a move down functionality. So I'm going to need everything up to my index, not including. So I plus plus. Oh yeah, so let me declare a destination array. Var rows equals to empty array. Right, so individual row, I'm going to start with empty object. And then I'm going to say row index I dot path equals basically my data path. So basically up to but not including my my index. I'm just copying path from my source table, which is this data table, into my new array, right, where I'm going to store stuff. Right. So when I'm done, oh yeah, I do need to push. So push. The rows dot push row. Okay, so that should populate everything up to my index. Then I need to push. So rows dot push So data of my index plus 1. Right, so I'm pushing a row that originally came after my index. Right, then rows dot push data my index. Right, and finally, the rest of it, right? So for I equals my index plus 1, I less than data dot length, right? I plus plus. And then basically we're doing the same same deal here. All right. So I think I got it right. So okay, so we'll be getting everything up to my original index. Then one row. So my original index in this case 40. Well, it's 1. So basically this gets me row 0. Then row 2 gets pushed as index 1. Then my index gets pushed as index 2. So I need to start from 3. Let's see, from 0, 1. So plus 2, I guess. Okay, so let me see what I get in the end. So I'm going to add another table to my script block so I can output results to check them first. All right. So I'm going to do table set, add that result, rows, and for the column, because it's just one column table, I'll just literally type in the array. That should get us the table that we need. Let's do this auto run for now. Okay, so something went wrong. Let's see what went wrong. So this is what's coming in, by the way. And this is what's coming out. So we failed to get, okay, so I, from 0 to, okay, yeah, that's my bad. I shouldn't, this is an object of, not an array, so this did not need an index. That's probably what the problem was. There you go. And of course, same thing here. There. Okay. So let's see what just happened. So we were index 1, which is this guy here. And we want to move down, which we did, right? So this 10 is now above me. It was below, and the rest is the same. Okay. So this is correct. So I can turn off auto run. And now I can actually set the source. I think that should work. So what I'm going to do, so this sets just this result just for us to check. But if I do the same, so let me go ahead and copy this. And so this time our target would be the data table itself. And here I'm going to add a flag true, which is supposed to, rather than just write into this script property, is supposed to follow and write it to the original target, that from where this is bound. All right, so I'm going to hit OK. Now I don't want it to auto run. I want this to run on. So let me close this. Of course, on click there. So before we move on to move up functionality, let's see if this is going to work. Hopefully it's going to write all the way out to our table here, because that's what's important. So yay, okay, it works, right? So I didn't even have to target it directly, just writing out to the symbol property, actually propagated the changes all the way back to the original table. So now we just have to go back to this symbol. All right, and here, what I'm going to do is, rather than kind of modify this up button, just going to copy the up symbol, delete up button, duplicate the down button, rename it back, and paste the arrow. Right here, I just need to change my logic to compare it against 0 and reverse this. Okay, just so we disable the button when we're supposed to. And of course, the script would be different as well. So as you can see with the script, it's much cleaner in terms of visual, right? You only have one block, but it might be more difficult to troubleshoot if you have any issues, especially for someone who may not be versed in Java DG script. Okay, so here we do sort of kind of reverse of what we've done there. Not reverse, but adjust it. So we want to get all the rows. So since we're moving up this time, right, and currently we're row 13, so we want to get everything up to my index -1, right? Then push my index. Right? Then push my index -1. Now remember, here we got everything up to -1, right? Then my index, then -1. And then from my index, to the rest of it, I believe. Let's see if, so let's disable writing back for a second and auto run and see if we get what we expect. Okay, so and compared to the original, we are number 13. We're here, 1-15, right? Yes. And so in the result, 1-15 moved up to number 12. Right, swapped places with 1-7. And then, okay, so we're, there's one more item. So we need to start from my index +1. So we're started too early there. So that we should no longer have doubles. So again, this is now we're here. This is 7 and 8, 9, and so on. Compared to this, we're here, right? 7 is above us, 8, 9, and on, right? So the rest holds true. So we're ready to, again, turn off auto run and uncomment the write back. Okay, there you go. Okay, okay, we're done with this part. Now we're moving on to drag and drop, I promise. Okay, so for drag and drop, I'm going to need another column where I can have a symbol that's grabbable. Making the whole row grabbable is going to be a problem because since it's not a single object, it consists of multiple cells. You would have to make each one grabbable. And if it's already performing another function, also making it grabbable and droppable will be just a pain in the butt. So I suggest you create a dedicated cell, dedicated column that will allow you to drag and drop, and the rest of the grid remains as is. Typically, this will hardly detract from overall functionality and will spare you a lot of gray hair. So we need one more column. Before we do that, let's do something with these terrible headers. So, for example, for these two columns, they're what I call service columns, right? They're not meant to display any values from the original table. So I don't want any titles there. But as you notice, what happens when you leave the label blank, it by default uses the name of the column that you are basing this on as your label. So if you want to actually this to be empty or invisible, give it a space. Right, that's enough to for the header to go away. Of course, you can also use a symbol for the header and just make it empty there in your symbol. Here, if you expand this, right, there's a header symbol that you can drop, whole separate topic. So there, so we have a column that's empty. We need a third one, so I'm going to just duplicate these two. We need yet another column in our original table on which to base this one. So we haven't used, so we've already used writable, we've used invocable, we haven't used base, so why not, right? It's an empty column that's not being used here. Again, if you don't have enough columns to add all the extra stuff, use column mapping block to add just service columns. They can be empty values, but just to add columns to your original table so that you have as many as you need to base new columns on. Right, so this one, notice how it doesn't exist. It's not shown here because I already have column called invocable, so it doesn't let me show the second one based on the same original column. But as soon as I change this to the one we haven't used yet, right? Notice it shows up right away. Okay, so now we need to build a new symbol. So what I'm going to do is it might leverage some of the functionality that already exists. So I'm going to use this reorder script cell and duplicate it. And I'm going to call it drag script. And that's going to be what's driving this column. All right, and now I can get in there and start editing. Okay, so if we dissect what this should look like, right? So any row can be grabbable, but it also has to be a target, right? And not a single target, but you should be able to drop it above or below. So it has to have two targets, right? So this little symbol has to have two targets, upper half and lower half, so that when you're ready to drop, you can drop either above, like an upper portion or lower portion, so you could see where it's going to get dropped, above or below. Now, if you really want to get fancy, you could probably figure out a way to actually insert a row, a placeholder row, where your target will be dropped. So it actually physically inserts a kind of blank row where it's going to be. I think this is going to be way too difficult for this tutorial. So we're going to go slightly simpler route. And we're going to show kind of underline upper and lower portions to indicate that you're dropping it above or below. Okay, so we need two targets, which is what we have here, up and down. So I can keep the logic. I might reuse some of it later on. So we just need to remove, of course, any characters from there. Right? And we're going to make them droppable. So we're going to search for droppable, right? And they have to be all of the same drop group. So we'll just call it row. If you have more than one draggable object, you don't want to cross-pollinate them, right? So that the target that's meant for your, for example, rows would also accept, I don't know, your icons or something, right? So that's why you have drag group. As long as the group matches between whatever draggable, droppable objects you have, these objects will allow you to drag drop, but will not allow you to drop something from another drop group or drag group. Okay, so we have that. Now we need something to actually drag. Now the whole thing can be draggable, I'm pretty sure. So let's go ahead and make the whole cell draggable. And drag group, of course, be row. And drag data, that's important. So the data that we want to drag would be probably this, basically, our path and then the original index. I don't know if we're going to need that, but I think we might. So let me just copy this. I'm going to copy this over to the top level. All right, and we redo the links since we changed location in the hierarchy, right? The bindings have kind of gone away. Right, and this table is going to be the drag data. That's what I'm going to receive when I drop something. Okay, so let me pick a row that's not at the top, so we have kind of enough below and above to comfortably, calculate things. And we need to create some sort of visual indication that it's grabbable or draggable. So what I'm going to do is, rather than having this be vertical, I'm going to make this absolute, right? And I'm going to, physically make each of these to be kind of half. And the reason I want to do that is this way I can actually add something right on top. Right, maybe place it right in the middle. Right. I'm going to make it completely mouse transparent, so just purely visual. And here I'm going to place an icon that shows you that this is draggable, which is going to come again from my beloved and hated character map here. All right, so I found what looks like a 90s version of the dotted interactive icon, right? So let's go ahead and use that. Of course, keep in mind you can just use actual image icon or whatever you prefer. So something like this. Right. The whole thing is going to be, well, I want to hand cursor over it. So it looks like you can grab it if you wanted to. And these should not have any cursors associated with them. Okay, so since I already made this draggable, so it will already, right, allow me to basically grab it, right, and move it, right, and it already shows me that I can drop something, right. Right now, there's no visual indication, right, but as I can see as I mouse over upper and lower half, right, the target is valid, right. Somewhere in between, it's not, and then it's valid again, and so on. So that part is already handled. Now I just need to tell it what to do with that data. Right, so you can see that since I made things draggable and droppable already, right, it responds to those selections, right? It allows me to grab something and drag it. And so when it's in between the rows, right, you can see that there's no target. When I mouse over upper or lower half, right, they get targeted just fine. These don't get targeted, right? So it already responds. It's just nothing happens on the actual event of dragging or dropping. So let's go. Let's get in there and first visually indicate that you're dragging over something, right? So I want to visually highlight maybe upper border and lower border of up and down to show you that, well, you're you're over a valid target and you could drop something here. So there's an if we look at events, there should be events on drag over this. So on drag over, right, and drag leave, right. So what we want to do for this up, let me do this. Let me swap locations. So up is up and down is down. It's just makes it a little easier. Remember, this is absolute layout, which is why they're the hierarchy doesn't matter here because they're side by side. Okay, so in up, down, that's what, oh, this is up, sorry. So these two are the events from the up button. So I'm going to use a state block. All right, and I'm going to affect, so I'm going to first configure top border to be, let's say, red, 2 pixels, or 3, solid, but 0 opacity, right? And I'm going to control this opacity here. So I'm going to set it to 100 when I drag over, right? And back to 0 when I drag leave. And I'm going to copy this, go to my down button, just paste it. Let's see here. Make sure I have the same thing enabled. So red, 3, solid, 0 opacity. There. All right, so on drag over 100%, on drag leave 0. Right? These were relative to the object, right? So now they're pointing to the down. So everything here is fine. The only thing I forgot to do, disable serialization. Okay, so now when I drag over, I should be able to see valid targets, and I do, but there's a problem. Of course, the problem is that I'm highlighting the upper edge on both of them, where I should be highlighting the lower edge on the down target. So let's go back to down. And so this, I'll have to go back to 0, non. And this one we'll go to solid 3, red 0, and our change state block will be affecting it. All right. Everything else is fine. Okay, so as I preview, right, and I grab something, notice that I can already tell where it's going to drop. Now, what I want to do is I want the row that's already myself to be disabled when I do that, so that my own row does not become a target. So let's get in there. So on grab, there should be, I think, on drag start, right? So on drag start, I want basically to turn off mouse enabled on these two. So state block, it's going to affect the mouse on both of these. And by the way, we don't need these anymore. Actually, we may, because we would have to disable targets in some cases, I guess, but we'll deal with it later. Actually, no, maybe we won't need to. So there we go. Disable serialization, and we want to disable mouse enabled. Originally, of course, enabled. Same thing here. So disable, originally enabled. And this, of course, happens on drag start. Right, and on drag, and it releases them, right? So let's see how well that works. So if I grab this row here, notice that it doesn't allow me to target it. It allows me to target the others just fine, just not this one. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so now we need to do something with it, with the target. So when you drop, what do we do? Okay. So drag data is what we're going to be dealing with, and we're going to get it using, if I recall, mouse event block. Right, and on drop is what we're looking for, drag drop. There. I don't think we have only on drop, so on drag drop is what we need, I believe. Yes. So this will yield us drag data, which will give us the row that we brought in. So we would somehow need to simulate it so that we can work with it. Let's see. It won't allow us to drag this, and we purposely disabled ability to do that. So let's see if maybe we're going to see something in context this way. So we're going to drop it here, and then we're going to go in edit, and let's see if this will show us the data. No, it will not. Okay, so let's think of a different strategy here. Basically, what's important is that we get drag data here as a source so we can start working with actual content. So we can do it another way. We can simulate drag data for now, and then just bind it afterwards, and just do that instead. Yeah. So because our drag data would be simply this, but with some other index. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy, so I'm going to create a copy of a table right here, and just cut it from here. And this was row 7. Go to some other row here. Right, paste it, right? And I'm going to treat it as if this came from my drop. Right, drag data. And when I'm done, I'm just going to bind this, right? So it would really come from there. But for now, I'm just going to do this. So let's call it drop data. Right, and so I'm going to basically work as if this is what got dropped. So my script would basically need to do what? Well, it does need to know my index, and it needs to have drop data. It doesn't really need to hold drop data, so it just needs drop index, right, which is a number, and it needs drop UUID, which is a string. Because remember, our drop is always a single row, so we can just straight up bind. What did I just open? Sorry, too many things open. I want to make sure I bind from the right spot. There. Like so. Okay, and now let's adjust the script. Again, I'm going to disable this so we can keep checking our results so it doesn't write back yet, and enable auto run so it just always runs. And in this case, here's what we need to do. So this is up button, so that means we need to drop something before. So we do want to get everything up to my index, which we do. Then we want to push what came in, right? Which is this. So drop UUID. So let's create. So let's do this then. Rows dot push. And then, so here it would be an object. I don't know if this is going to work, but let's try it. Add dot drop UUID. Okay. So path. Okay, so gonna be path colon this. This should work, but we'll see. Then, so after that, drop myself. After that, so we no longer need to drop this. And then when we drop the rest, or actually, or even when we add these guys, we need to make sure we don't add anything that matches this guy here. So we're going to say if data I dot path not equals add dot drop UUID. All right. And then, of course, same goes for the afterwards. I forgot the if statement. So basically add everything but what I just dropped, right, up to my current index, then what I just dropped, then everything after I just, then myself, then everything after I dropped again, except for my dropped index. And that should do the trick. So let's take a look at the results. So we're at index 11. So what I just dropped should be inserted as index 10 right now, which is this. So what I dropped is, yep, number 7. Right, so VV1-13, which is right here. Okay, so and originally things were, I think I'm off by 1 somewhere. So this is the original. Okay, so this is me here originally. So 1-6. This is still me. So what did I add? 113 got added here. I was already there. Okay, so VV113. Okay, I'm missing something here, so hold on. Bear with me. So what I'm expecting to see, make this a little smaller. What I'm expecting to see is that the 113, which is what I'm trying to drop, gets inserted, and I'm currently index 11. So this is, I'm row 11, and I'm dropping above row 11. So I'm expecting number 10 to be set to 113, but instead of it's number 9. So okay, that's why, because I have to go up to my index, right? Then my dropped item 113, then my current item, and then everything after my current item. Yeah, and as long as it doesn't match. Okay, so that I think just should fix it, and there you go. Okay, so that's exactly what I want. So I think that's fine. We can. There you go. All right, so now we need to invoke this not on click, of course, but on drop. But it's going to get a little bit tricky. I think we can use this event here. Drag source, drag data. We'll try to use this event here because we need to make sure this triggered after the drop data has arrived. So if I just use on drag drop trigger, it'll probably get fired before this drag data becomes available, and it's going to get messy. So now I can link this here, right? So because in the real world, this will get replaced. I'm going to copy this and go to my down block. And what is this? Wow, this is fine. I'm going to paste the same script, but in the script, I just have to replace the order of things, right? So here I'm going to be adding myself, which is my own row first, then the dropped row, right? Everything else remains the same. Okay. All right. So with any luck, I think that might just work. Let's check it out. And hopefully we're not gonna, oh yeah, I don't think we turned on the propagation to the original table. So check the script real quick. Oh yeah, no auto run. And allow propagation to the original table. And same thing for this, no auto run. And allow propagation. Okay, I'm going to save the page just in case. And now let's look. So I'm grabbing, dragging, dropping, and nothing happened. Okay, so this could be what I was telling you, that the trigger is, oh yeah, see, it worked this time, but it's not going to work potentially every time. Okay, it's doing something. I'm not sure what it's doing. Hold on. So 12, drop it below 15, nothing. Drop it below 13, nothing. Drop it below 7, something. So it works when I drag it far enough. Okay, I think I have a problem with the trigger here. Let me try this to fix this. I think it might be firing maybe a little early. So what I'm going to do is on drag data, I'm going to try to use drag data as a trigger for the script. But actually this. But maybe let me do a slight delay just for a good measure, so that values from cells of this table actually end up here before I do anything else. I'm going to use literally like 0.2 of a second delay. And I'm going to do the same for up. Let's see if this is going to do the trick. So let's move number 10 to below number 2. Yep. Yep. Above 2. Yep. Okay. So there you go. So as you see, timing is extremely important. Sometimes the difference could be literally, a fraction of a second. You just have to ensure that something arrives later than something else. It doesn't matter by how much. Of course, when you introduce a large enough delay, it's just going to be visually annoying and unappealing. But sometimes just a tiny delay is enough, just to ensure that things that technically happen at the same time don't. That one always happens later, even if it's a tiny bit later. In this case, we just have to make sure that we invoke the script just slightly later than the data arrives into the drop. So we always know that the script will run with fresh values from that drop, and never, in no case, slightly before it, right? Before all the propagation happened from the drop data to the script properties. And there you have it. So we've just created drag drop rows that allows you to rearrange the table. Now, if you explore kind of dragging options, you can see that you can actually use custom symbol that will show up as you're dragging. By default, right, what you're dragging is a copy of what you grabbed, and that's what you see in here. But you can actually use your own symbol as a drag symbol, so it looks like something else. So you can customize this. Again, you can, of course, I did it kind of simpler method by using the same target, grabbable and droppable objects on the same cell. Maybe that's not simpler, actually. Maybe that's slightly more difficult. But you could add drop targets to all of these cells, right? So that you could potentially drop it on any row if you really wanted to. You saw how to create targets. You saw what needs to happen when you drop a target. So, but that's up to you. I don't think there's a need to explicitly show this in this tutorial. You can derive it from what you've already seen. So with that, I think it's time to wrap up this tutorial. It's already has run on entirely too long, and yeah, so go ahead and use the grid to your advantage. There's a lot you can do with this. There are some limitations, of course, but there's a lot you can do with the grid. And you'll find this particular page linked in the description, so you can download it and mess around with it and adopt it to your needs as you see fit.